Kamal, a snap election in July, the world has stopped turning on its axis. Something's gone quite strangely wrong here because Rishi Sunak, a man who, let's be honest, hasn't been that brave and that bold, has completely shocked Westminster this afternoon.
He has. He's called a general election for July the 4th, which I don't think was on many people's betting slip. We now can see the plan he had from the big election speech he gave at the Policy Exchange just over a week ago, where he laid out the agenda for the Conservative election campaign. We called it in our Daily Tea special on that day, Can Rishi Reboot the Tories? We said this is the start of the official election campaign. It felt like that, didn't it? And now looking back with the announcement they're just about to make today, it clearly was that. Second point, this morning, much better economic figures for him.
Yes.
He clearly wanted to wait for some green shoots, maybe a little bit more than that, even more than green shoots of a better economy. And that came this morning with the inflation figures, which showed that inflation is falling. He is going to cut and run from July the 4th because he believes momentum is on his side.
There's this notion, I think, within Downing Street that the electorate is not convinced that it's safe to vote for Labour at this point. So if the economy looks as if it's being fixed, people might ask themselves, well, why break it? Why trust Starmer and Reeves? And I know there's polling to suggest that the country believes that Labour is now the party of economic competence and not the Tories. I've spoken to a senior Tory MP this afternoon for their reaction to this. Their view is quite interesting. They think that the people around Rishi Sunak are young and inexperienced, that they lack campaign know-how, that perhaps there's a sense that they're trying to cut and run, that maybe they're growing weary of being so far behind in the polls. We've seen figures from YouGov today again reflecting this idea that the 5-point plan isn't working for Sunak, that his personal approval rating is still down on the floor. Maybe there's this sense they could have got internal focus polling to suggest that it's now or never. The Tory MP said to me, I didn't think that we had a chance of winning the next election if it was in November. He put the chances of that at 1 in 6. He reckons there's no chance at all of getting anywhere close on July the 4th. He's also made the point, which I think is a valid one, this is strategically really strange. You're now giving Labour time to regroup, to campaign between now and July? That's the longest election campaign in history. The only advantage to it, if you look at the other opponents the Tories are facing, is Reform isn't ready. Reform is having trouble assembling enough candidates to stand in seats. It's had to suspend, I think, 10 of them in recent weeks. So maybe he catches Nigel Farage on the hoof, but at the same time, this is now giving Starmer the perfect opportunity to fully mobilise the troops.
It will also it will put Labour a little on the back foot. The last senior group of people I spoke to in the Labour Party were imagining, this was their plan, summer would be about them landing their pledges. Then it would come to the conference season. In the Tory party conference, Labour was expecting that Rishi Sunak would announce the date of the election in his conference speech and then go for November the 14th. The thinking in the Labour Party was that that would give the Conservatives a series of months of slightly better economic news, better inflation, possibly interest rates coming down, a little bit more growth in the economy. And that was what they were really waiting for. The last time a Conservative Prime Minister cut for a quick election was Theresa May.
Yes.
That did not go well.
No.
Often when the public feel there is a journey towards an election and it is set, if suddenly, as a complete surprise, the government or the Prime Minister suddenly announces an election, it feels like a shock, yes, but also is it panic?
Yes.
Is Rishi Sunak so far behind he doesn't know what else to do? The polls simply won't move. This is a last throw of the dice. And that, I think, will be because the public doesn't follow it in the way we do. Do you remember with Gordon Brown? Was he going to go for that early election? Was he going to go for that early election? And in the end, he decided not to. That really undermined the public's faith in Gordon Brown as a long-term Prime Minister. I think for this and Rishi Sunak, given that he has changed his approach, am I the change candidate, am I the steady as she goes candidate, to the public, this will add to a problem for him on perception that he makes rash, rapid decisions with little strategy.
The other thing about having a longer election campaign is there's more time for things to go wrong. I'm just reminded of Gordon Brown's comment to the so-called bigot. You remember Gillian Duffy went terribly badly wrong. The other thing about timing, I take your point on better economic news. The Prime Minister reacted to that by saying that there were brighter days ahead. OK, check. That's a good one. Immigration figures, net migration coming down. OK, another tick against the Rishi Sunak box. Strong speech where he stated that effectively Keir Starmer could be a danger to national security. That landed quite well. Brilliant. However, let's just look at Scotland, because this week we saw figures which suggest that the Labour Party is now 10 points ahead of the SNP. So we've just had complete calamity and chaos with the SNP, Humza Yousaf's resignation and everything that's gone with it. It's handing Starmer an advantage, surely, to go in July when the SNP haven't had time to reconstitute itself under John Swinney. Labour will capitalise on that. That could be as many as 20 or 30 extra seats.
And then if you think about the other battleground where the Conservatives have to be wary, and that's the South West or the Liberal Democrat battles, the swing to Liberal Democrats in by-elections has been higher in 2023 than the swing to Labour when it's a Liberal Democrat Conservative battle. So if the Liberal Democrats can achieve as much in their battleground seats as the Labour Party could achieve in Scotland, it's that pincer movement I think is the most dangerous to the Conservatives. I think your point is absolutely right, though. He's gone quickly because Reform are basically still tying up their shoelaces.
Reform, by the way, have got a press conference tomorrow. So Thursday, they say they're going to make a huge announcement. I called their people today to find out what it is. Obviously, they'd like to pull a defection out of the bag at this point. It's not that. It's Richard Tice, the leader, responding to the immigration figures. This does put pressure on Farage. Make no mistake, he's got to now decide pretty quickly if he's going to put his eggs in the UK election basket or the US election basket.
Keir Starmer still knows he has a mountain to climb. As you say, Rishi Sunak is betting that Keir Starmer hasn't sealed the deal with the public. The mountain he has to climb from the last election is as big as Tony Blair, the swing as Tony Blair had to achieve in 1997 for Keir Starmer to get a majority of one seat. So everything needs to now land in the right way for Keir, and those polls cannot be soft.
To conclude on that point, maybe people feel that the Tories' decision-making here is doomed, but there is some sense to it. It's not dumb. Kamal, let's be honest, we're going to be talking about this tomorrow and probably for days to come on the Daily Tea. In just a moment, we're going to take you through what happened at the Post Office inquiry. And of course, we're also going to see what happened when Craig Mackinlay returned to Westminster, albeit a changed man, but a much stronger one.
And lovely scenes there.
You know now that Susan Palmer, the sub-postmistress at Grange Post Office in Rayleigh, had been acquitted by a jury in January 2007, Mrs. Palmer having blamed Horizon at trial for the losses said to have been attributable to her. Why were you telling these parliamentarians that every prosecution involving the Horizon system had been successful and had found in favour of the Post Office?
I fully accept now that the Post Office, the Post Office knew that. I completely accepted. Personally, I didn't know that, and I'm incredibly sorry that that happened to those people and to so many others.
We've been hearing evidence all day from Paula Vennells. It's the first time she's spoken since 2015 on the outrageous events of the Horizon IT scandal. More than 900 sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses wrongly convicted of stealing money from the business. It's had tragic effects. A number of people have taken their own lives. People have been put in prison wrongly for many years. People have had their lives wrecked. And finally, we had the moment when Ms Vennells, the chief executive, through a lot of this period between 2012 and 2019, finally came to give evidence to the official inquiry that has been set up.
Did it deliver, Kamal? Because this is the moment the victims and their families have been waiting for, to hold her particularly to account as the former CEO, somebody who had to be stripped of her CBE some months ago because of the scandal. Did she answer the questions she needed to?
She's going to be speaking for 3 days. This first morning was really quite mesmerising. As you say, a number of the people who want to hear answers from her were in the audience. Alan Bates, of course, who became incredibly famous because of the ITV drama, Mr Bates versus the Post Office, which has been seen by so many millions of people. Fiona Hamilton, who also appeared in that drama. I'm just going to go through some of my notes I've been taking. We've been watching the hearing unfold today. I'm going to go through a few of the notes because it was really remarkable. One of the first moments was when a new character to many people came into this, a woman called Moya Greene. Now, Moya Greene was chief executive of the Royal Mail. Now, the Royal Mail is the sister organisation to the Post Office, which deals with parcels and some parts of the delivery process, rather than the actual post offices that you see on high streets in towns and villages around the country. I've interviewed Moya Greene on a number of occasions. She's a really high-flying executive. She's Canadian. She's run post office companies around the world. And a WhatsApp exchange was revealed during the questioning when Moya Greene says to Paula Vennells, "I think you knew."
That's the big question that kept on reoccurring today. How could you not have known? You were in charge. And you speak about Moya Greene. I've heard very positive things about her. It's challenging for Vennells because she is asked, did you get on with this woman, this person you had to work with at very close quarters? Oh, yes, we were very good friends.
For many years, it says.
For many years. And it seems as if Moya Greene in this is putting her finger precisely on the pulse of this issue.
And she says, Moya Greene says in another one of these WhatsApps, it's incredible, isn't it, Camilla? When you see the WhatsApp exchanges, you get right into that moment when they are sharing information. These WhatsApps were shared earlier this year. And Moya Greene says in the WhatsApps about the Post Office dragging its heels, Paula Vennells dragging her heels. And Moya Greene says, "I can't support you." And Ms Vennells does say, "I wish I had known." And it is under this forensic questioning by the KC, Jason Beer. He's the lead counsel. He has this way of unemotionally asking this question after question after question. You hear him at the top of the podcast of this episode today. He's the person asking Paula Vennells about why did you tell parliamentarians that every case had been found in your favour when there was already evidence that you had lost cases. It's his metronomic questioning that really puts Miss Vennells under the spotlight, and that is the point at which she does eventually break down.
What I found about today's performance, if you can call it that, is that you listen to her speaking and you're scratching your head thinking that it's almost inconceivable that she doesn't know, because as Jason Beer points out, well, we've got the documentation. It didn't take us long to find out. And then you think to yourself, if she didn't know, then at best she's negligent because she's in charge. This all happened on her watch. At what point do you say to somebody who was CEO of a company that failed its sub-postmasters and postmistresses that regardless of what you knew and what you didn't know, you take vicarious responsibility because that's why you're paid the big bucks?
Jason Beer goes through so many of these issues. Ms Vennells has put in a very long witness statement, nearly 780 pages. And Mr Beer constantly is questioning Ms Vennells about, were you trying to blame the IT? He also reveals an email where Ms Vennells says, our priority is to protect the business. And then there's another part which is incredibly emotional for the families of one of the sub-postmasters, Martin Griffiths, who takes his own life after the horrific treatment he receives from the prosecuting authorities from the Post Office, treatment that Alan Bates describes as thuggery. And in that situation, Ms Vennells, according to Jason Beer's questions, is trying to say, oh, were there other issues around why this person took their own life? And Mr Beer is making the point, and of course we won't know the findings of the inquiry for months or maybe even till next year, but he's making the point that here we could see evidence that there was a lack of humanity in the way the Post Office considered the treatment of the people who worked for it.
Which is odd, because this woman is trained as a vicar. So she is somebody in a hugely public-facing role that needs to show empathy, that needs to show understanding. The other thing that struck me about her testimony was that she doesn't look like the kind of person that necessarily should be running a big organisation like the Post Office. I don't think people will be looking at her and finding confidence in her leadership skills, which may have been a problem for the very beginning. And after the week we've just had, Kamal, with the blood inquiry and those findings, you know, what a week it's been. We were discussing, weren't we, the birth trauma report that came out last week, which was hugely critical of the NHS. We've also done a piece here on the Telegraph about NHS whistleblowers. Once again, the central theme is that lessons must be learned, but no one takes responsibility. Nobody's ultimately held accountable for these mistakes, which, as you've pointed out, cost people their lives.
You asked a question at the beginning, Camilla, which was, would this be satisfactory, or would this be a moment at least of some closure for so many victims, as you say, many of them listening in person to the inquiry which is being held in central London? And I think probably not. She did make an apology statement at the beginning saying how much she regretted what had happened and apologising to the victims. But at points through her evidence, at one point she said she was curious about what had happened. There was actually laughter. I mean, derisory laughter, not humorous laughter. There was actually laughter from the people who were watching the testimony.
A distinct lack of curiosity, that's the point.
Exactly. Mr Beer just kept asking, why didn't you know? And giving her documentary evidence that she should have had during the period that she was chief executive.
Interesting to see Keir Starmer speak at Prime Minister's questions in response actually to the blood inquiry, but making this point about a statutory duty of candour that should be imposed not only on ministers but also mandarins. This is this idea of legislating to end this sort of defensiveness, not just by government, but departments and the NHS and key organisations, which can have a profound effect on people's lives, but also just to prevent a repeat of a cover-up. And there was quite an interesting exchange between the Labour leader and the Prime Minister. They both seemed to agree on it. Rishi Sunak was almost suggesting that the law was already in place. But as we've witnessed with recent scandals, it can't be, because we have this situation where heads get buried in the sand and nobody actually addresses the issues. And as we proved with whistleblowers, the trouble is that the people who do speak out, they seem to be penalised. They aren't welcomed. It is not as if, you know, the sunlight of disinfectant cleans up the mess. These people are often forced out of their jobs while the middle managers who preside over these scandals get promoted.
It's a wonder, isn't it? Politicians often ask why there isn't more trust in institutions, in their work. And the public look at these events and it must be in people's minds, why does it need a new law to behave in an empathetic, not emotional in the sense of not being, logical about what you're doing, but we've all, the two of us have worked in journalism for many decades. We've covered many institutions, and I'm always struck, as I have been in this case, as you say, for the blood inquiry, people who have covered Hillsborough, many other inquiries, Grenfell. The next report from Grenfell is going to be later this year, we expect. That why does it need a law for us to be able to do the right thing?
Yes.
And that's where there needs to be fundamental change in what, particularly publicly funded organisations. The Post Office is funded by us.
Yeah, and the taxpayer may have to cover the cost for recompensing those affected by this scandal, as is the case with infected blood. The readers are, I'd say, pretty angry about Vennells, and they are saying, I mean, let me just quote three of them who all say the same thing. Edward, Chuck, Terry, I think some jail time would help cement her apologies. Jail time would be a good outcome. Apologies mean nothing, said Terry. They cost nothing and anyone can apologise for anything. Get this despicable woman on trial and behind bars. Punishment, not words. Look, she isn't subject to any criminal proceedings right now, and she's deserves to be heard, in her own words, at the inquiry. But that's the strength of feeling about this idea of those in charge not carrying the can.
Two just small parts which are slightly more positive. Just to remind our audience, Paula Vennells was stripped of her CBE, which she had received in 2019 when there was already lots of evidence that this scandal was ongoing. So why she was given a CBE, I think,
why she
needs to
accepted
be,
it.
and why she accepted it, although she doesn't appear to think she actually did directly anything wrong from the evidence we've seen from her testimony today. And the second thing, that all of those 900 cases, there has now been legislation passed to exonerate each of those people. So at least there has been some degree of justice for the people affected.
We look forward to more justice. Well, before we tell the extraordinary story of Craig Mackinlay and his return to Westminster after what must have been the most horrific 6 months that anyone could endure, let's just put him into context. Not everyone's heard of him. I know him because he's a leading Brexiteer. He's one of the so-called Spartans, had lots of interaction with him between 2016 and 2019 because he was in the European Research Group. Obviously, you think these are my people, Kamal. Well, he's a lovely MP, very polite man, very engaging, very straight-talking. The Tory MP for South Thanet. Weirdly, he was in UKIP and he ran for that seat against Nigel Farage, beat him on behalf of the Tories and won it in 2015. He's based in Kent. He's the kind of MP that would be very familiar to his constituents, salt of the earth, knocking doors, handing out leaflets type of chap. Now, I saw him, I think, just a few weeks before the autumn conferences, met him at an event, had a chat as we normally do. Didn't think much of it. The next thing I found out was a few months later, where I won't name the MP because he got very emotional when he came on my GB News show. I said to him afterwards, after we've gone off air, what's the matter? And he said, look, I've seen Craig Mackinlay. He's been very, very ill with sepsis and he's had to have limbs amputated. This was before Christmas. I was just knocked for six because I've read about sepsis before, but it didn't make sense to me, Kamal, because I'd seen this bloke just weeks earlier. And basically, he's returned to Westminster today after a gruelling 6 months of being in a coma, having intense physiotherapy, and of course, having these 4 limbs amputated. Should we just hear the reception he received, because it's really quite touching?
Before we begin Prime Minister's questions, I'm sure the whole House would like to join me in welcoming back our colleague, our friend, an inspirational, honourable member for South Thanet. Craig, it's so good to have you back amongst us. You are the man of the moment, and I met your daughter, who is going to be the daughter of the month with her birthday tomorrow. So can I say to you and your family, it is an inspiration to people in this country who've suffered with sepsis. You have shown us the way forward. Thank you for everything. And that's the only reason I allow clapping.
That was the brilliant Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House, at the end of Craig Mackinlay's first entry into the House of Commons since he contracted sepsis, saying, because of course people shouldn't really clap in Parliament, but Lindsay Hoyle was making a completely justifiable exception in this case. Sepsis, of course, is a very serious disease. It's when you have a reaction against an infection which actually starts fighting your own body. It spreads incredibly quickly. And a bit later on, we'll explain some of the symptoms and what they look like.
I mean, the standing ovation is in recognition of the fact that he's walking into the House of Commons. His own wife, Coty, was in the gallery to see this, and their 4-year-old daughter, Olivia. She was told that he had a 5% chance of survival. The original hospital he was admitted to said he was the most ill patient they've ever had to deal with. So the idea of him now being able to go back to work and go back to addressing the concerns of his constituents is nothing short of astonishing. It's probably best to let Craig explain the amputations, because what happened was when you get sepsis, it cuts off blood supply to your extremities. And sorry for those of a sensitive disposition, but basically his feet and his hands went completely black. They died, a little bit like frostbite. And he was told that he had to have them all removed. And this is a video he recorded on the night before that operation. I mean, imagine that, Kamal. He's got this sort of strength of character.
Amazing that he's done this, yeah.
Yeah, and he basically recorded this video on November the 30th. And this is what he said.
The reality is I probably shouldn't have survived this far because the damage that was done by this by sepsis was so severe. You don't often see people in my condition and actually surviving. So, that's a big thanks to what they've done to keep me alive. But I've been sort of subsisting for the last 2 months, getting sort of stronger. And for the damage that was caused, now the damage is quite obvious. I know I've never seen anything like this before, where blood supply loss to extremities has caused this most strange, almost leather-like plastic material to emerge, and it's caused the complete death of my hands and also my feet. So the time has been spent really getting to a state of readiness for the next phase of my rehabilitation. Now,
what a contrast to what we were talking about earlier. First of all, a fantastic individual case study of NHS care. And secondly, to Craig Mackinlay himself, the transparency and honesty of his own testimony about his own brush with death. And that just allows so many other people to have conversations when they are seriously ill and when issues of the care they get. And it's those types of conversations that not only have the power of the great emotion that Craig and his family can feel from this, but also helps other people think about these conditions. Also,
he's very positive and saying how lucky he is to be alive, which I think is a sentiment that we can all share in. He's a changed man. He's joked that he's given up smoking now, which is a good thing. And he said that the way that he's going to tackle being an MP is obviously going to change. I mean, he's made the point that he can't knock all of the doors anymore, but he's got a 10,000 strong majority in South Thanet. He said he wants to fight the next general election. He's hoping that the constituents will see him as a fighter. If I fight for myself, then I'll fight on your behalf. And also, touchingly, he wants to now be known as the Bionic MP. So he made a point in the documentary he made with Chris Hope, now of GB News, but formerly of this parish, The Telegraph. He said to Chris, I want children to come into Parliament and demand to see the Bionic MP. I want to show that people with disabilities can get on, can return to work, can make a contribution. Because as he pointed out, nothing's wrong with my head or my mind. I'm no longer able-bodied, but I can do this and return to work. All credit to the man. I think it's absolutely remarkable what he's done and what he's achieved. He's very keen, of course, Kamal, you were saying about symptoms earlier, to raise awareness.
Yeah.
In his case, this sepsis just came so quickly. He felt unwell, he had a temperature, he vomited. His wife, who's a pharmacist, clearly spotted things aren't right here, and they got him into hospital. But should we go through some of the signs of sepsis so people can recognise them? We've done our own piece on the Telegraph website about this. Uncontrolled shivering and fever or high temperature, shortness of breath, weak pulse, extreme pain, particularly in extremities of your limbs, disorientation or confusion, very sweaty skin, and then a couple of more have been, those are the 6 main signs, but a couple more have been added by the sepsis research charity FEET. And that is passing little or no urine and also having blotchy or cold arms and legs. A sign for Craig and his wife was, she said his limbs basically went blue. And obviously then you're in the grip of septic shock.
So do check and do look at FEET, the website, the sepsis research charity, and also, of course, the NHS. One policy issue has been raised out of this. Again, brilliant that he's raised the whole idea of disability not being something that means you can no longer do things, which is fantastic. But just on the issue of prosthetics, he was given initially prosthetics which were from the NHS, which he described as medieval. He said they would be good for fighting and smashing windows, but not much else. He's raised money and he's paid privately for much better prosthetics, which have some methods of kind of holding things if it's your hands. And this debate about how do we support people who use prosthetics for all sorts of different reasons to have the very best that they can have, and how the NHS is not some kind of Cinderella service.
And I think he's making the point that there doesn't seem to be equity between those who lose their limbs in an accident or a terror attack, or indeed if they're in the armed forces, and those who lose them because of sepsis. So the first tranche of those victims get compensation from the government, but people who suffer from sepsis don't, and that doesn't seem to be right. And also, of course, it is a lottery. One of the reasons why I did the interview with Chris Hope is because Chris's daughter, Pollyanna, lost a leg, and the Hope family have done a great deal, not just to raise money for prosthetics for people in this country, but abroad where there's no hope at all of having decent prosthetics that can serve you for life. This is the thing. Craig wants to be able to pick up a cup. He wants to be able to use his mobile phone. He wants to do the things that people do. And raising awareness of that, I think, can only be a good thing. If anyone's in a position to try and influence government on this, it's arguably him.
And here's a little bit of policy advice that the NHS can have for free. Rather than spending millions and millions of pounds trying to fight whistleblowers revealing the truth about the NHS and how it treats its patients, use that money to support changes in areas that Craig Mackinlay is now going to obviously campaign on.
Do you read the Beano, Kamal?
I used to. It used to be one of my favourite moments of the week. I used to go to my local newsagent in West London. I think it was 5 pence.
Wow.
I know,
that was back
days.
in 1862.
Absolutely right. It was written on slate with chalk. No. And I used to read it, and the pleasure of turning over each print page of Dennis the Menace, the Bash Street Kids, Minnie the Minx, was so exciting. It was one of those moments as a young child that you absolutely loved. That hour you had, often up in my bedroom, I had bunk beds, lying on my bunk beds, reading the Beano. What a moment.
Aren't you an only child? Why did you have bunk beds?
Because friends could come to stay.
Yes, that's very
good,
nice.
very good,
Yes.
efficient use of space by my mother.
Love that. And what I also love is the fact that despite this digital era with children on smartphones the whole time, scrolling through TikTok videos, that the Beano's still going, and it's still going strong. So it launched a competition to ask primary school children for their favourite joke. Many schools applied, and the winner has been crowned. It's Northside Primary School in North Finchley, London, and it won the competition. Do you want to say the joke, or shall I?
You go for it, Camilla.
OK. What's the hottest area in the classroom?
I don't know, Camilla. What is the hottest area in the classroom?
The corner, because it's 90 degrees.
I do love that.
We love that mashup, don't we, of mathematical know-how and good humour.
It's an excellent thing to have those two skills, which is obviously skills that we both have.
Well,
in
I wouldn't
abundance.
say mathematical know-how for me because I'm functionally enumerate. But shall we Can you tell me your favourite joke, please?
What's the difference between a buffalo and a bison?
I think I remember this from a cracker somewhere, but I'd like you to give me the punchline anyway.
That's not the way you do jokes, Camilla. When someone says, what's the difference between, you say, I don't know. So let's do it again. Let's just try this again. And let's do proper comedic vocabulary. Okay,
right,
grammar.
okay.
Grammar of comedy is very important.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, I'll go again. Camilla, what's the difference between a buffalo and a bison?
Kamal, I don't know. What is the difference between a buffalo and a bison?
You can't wash your hands in a buffalo. That is a good joke.
It's not as good as mine.
I heard it in the gallery there. There was a bit of laughing.
Bit of chuckling. Can I give you mine?
Yes, sorry,
which
Camilla.
you will appreciate as somebody who studies numbers.
100%.
What did the 0 say to the 8?
I don't know, Camilla. What did the 0 say to the 8?
Nice belt. You like that one, don't you?
That is also a very good joke.